Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining me for this session of Straight Chablis. My name is May Matta-Aliah. I am a New York-based wine educator, and today our discussion is going to be on the Petit Chablis Village appellation, which just may be the most misunderstood appellation in the Chablis wine region. Maybe it's the word petit that leads people to think that it's somehow lesser than the Chablis appellation, but I'm here to set the record straight to tell you that they are both village level appellations. And what primarily distinguishes one from the other is, as always in the Bourgogne wine region, it's the terroir. When we're talking about the Chablis appellation, we are talking about vineyards that are located in the famous Camarguian soils of the Chablis region. When we're referring to the Petit Chablis appellation, we are usually referring to vineyards that are planted in the Portlandian soils. Those are younger soils. They're primarily lacking in the famous marine fossils or oyster fossils that we find in the Camarguian soils. Additionally, the vineyards are usually located at higher elevation, so on the plateaus, which also means that the vines will struggle a little bit on their path towards ripeness. What that means in the winery is that oftentimes you will find winemakers who may choose to put their wines through malolactic fermentation or malolactic conversion to soften some of that, otherwise what could be very bracing acidity. Another tool that you will find winemakers oftentimes relying on is to just allow those wines to rest on their lees in their cellars, whether it's in stainless steel tanks primarily or in large, more neutral barrels. But they will allow the wines to rest on the lees, and again, to sort of give a little bit of weight and richness to the wine. So those two winemaking techniques are very common to the Petit Chablis, also in the Chablis region in general, but in Petit Chablis, they really do tend to add a little bit of richness and weight to the wines. But the Petit Chablis wines are incredibly fresh, very approachable, oftentimes wines that can be best enjoyed in their youth. And I think that they offer a wonderful addition to a wine store shelf or to a wine list. But as always, we are joined with a guest today, and he will be bringing his perspective to those wines of Petit Chablis. Our guest today is Josh Cohen. I will allow him to introduce himself in a minute. And as usual, we'll be tasting 3 wines to complement the discussion. So thanks for joining us. And Josh, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves to our guests?
Okay, my name is Josh Cohen. Thank you very much for having me. I love Chablis, and it's a pleasure to be here today to chat with you about Petit Chablis. I'm a retailer. I bought a store in Dumbo, Brooklyn in 2005 called Blanc Rouge. It was one of the fairly early Brooklyn boutiques that focused on small producers, lesser known appellations, organic and biodynamic wines and natural wines before that became the thing that it is today. Mm-hmm. And then since then, I've become involved with Flatiron Wines. I'm one of the founders. We opened the San Francisco store in 2016.
How did you land in this position? Were you already involved in wine before?
No. I was a wine lover, and I was working as a lawyer in New York City, and decided to try my hand in an area that I was a little bit more passionate about. And so I ended up in wine.
So just to bring our guests up to speed on Petit Chablis, I'm going to bring out my handy dandy map, because anyone who knows me knows I'm a bit of a map nerd. So here's the map that we've been looking at before. One of the reasons I really love this map is, unlike flat maps, it is topographical. So it does give you a sense of some elevation in the region. So Petit Chablis, it is not a new appellation. Let's start by that, right? It has actually been an AOC since 1944. So it has been around for a long time. A lot of people are like, is it just a new appellation? No, it's not. And just like the Chablis appellation, it is spread out on both sides of the Serein River. So here's the Serein River, here's the village of Chablis itself, and then you've got the vineyards spread on both sides, east and left and right bank of the river. So the Petit Chablis, you will find it on the highest plateaus. So on either the higher elevation of the hillsides or on the flat plateaus. So generally, they don't have the same, they don't have the same exposure. And you have grapes that are ripening in cooler situations. Okay. In addition, your altitudes are typically between 750 feet to about 900 feet. And the other thing that we talked about is also the soils, the Portlandian soils. They are a younger soil. They're a soil that lays over the Camaragian soils. And by younger, I mean they're 120 million years old instead of 150 million years old. So again, we're not exactly talking about a new kid on the block. But what they are, the key differentiating factor between the Camaragian soils and the Portlandian soils, as I mentioned earlier, is the absence of those oyster fossil shells that you find all over the Chablis region. So they're soils that are usually a little bit sort of brownish. They're derived from limestone soils. But so it's this combination of different soils, of vines that are planted at higher elevations or on these plateaus, that gives the style of wine of Petit Chablis that distinct differentiation from the wines of Chablis. But just to reiterate, they're both village appellations. So if you're thinking of the classification pyramid, this hierarchy pyramid that we have in the wines of Bourgogne, the Petit Chablis and Chablis are side by side, right? One is not above or below the other. So that's my little overview of the Petit Chablis appellation. But as I mentioned, we have Josh here for a reason. Petit Chablis, when I say Petit Chablis to you, anything that in particular that comes to mind when I say Petit Chablis?
You know, I personally love Petit Chablis. You know, I drink it myself as an accessible, sort of slightly more easygoing Bourgogne Blanc. You know, just if what I really want is that crisp white Burgundy feeling without you know, having to worry about whether the bottle has been matured for long enough or does it need to be opened well in advance. It's really one of the perfect wines. It's also nice that while it isn't a lesser wine than Chablis, it is generally less expensive, and that definitely makes it easier, you know, to open a bottle and have a glass maybe while you're cooking and not worry about then just putting it back in the fridge and having some more the next day. And you know, I really like to be able to share with customers for largely the same reasons. You know, people sometimes want to experiment with Burgundy, but they can frankly be a little bit worried about the price tag to get in. And Petit Chablis is a great way to see what the region is all about. You have the clay limestone soils. You have the sense of terroir. You have you know, a very fresh wine with plenty of complexity, even if not as much complexity as, you know, a well-aged Grand Cru, and you know, for people who don't really have a lot of experience with that, it's a great way to get in without having to worry about, you know, whether it's really the perfect wine for the occasion and what happens if we don't finish it.
The other thing, you know, there was so many people today, I really want high acid wines. I mean, it's like that sort of acid hound thing. And, you know, typically Petit Chablis will have higher acidity as well because the grapes are, you know, in less, well, in areas that are a little bit more difficult for the grapes to ripen. And so, you know, side by side, if you had a Chablis versus Petit Chablis, usually the expression of the acidity will be a little bit more prominent. I find in a Petit Chablis, all things being equal, where it's always, you know, a little bit scary when you're drawing these generalizations, but to draw a broad generalization.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's an important part of the terroir of Petit Chablis that distinguishes it from Chablis. And of course, you know, those Grand Cru sites that sit right in the, you know, the middle of the slope and get all that sun. And I do wonder how much of the reputation that Petit Chablis has as being in some respect lesser Chablis among some people is a function of historically those wines being harder to ripen. You know, in this era of global warming, of course, the problem we have is not really getting wines that are ripe enough. The problem we have is, you know, maintaining acidities in these, you know, some of these very, very hot vintages. And that makes Petit Chablis really, you know, a perfect wine for our age too. I think today they're very consistent wines. You can open them with a lot of confidence. And I'm not sure that would have been true in the 1980s when our parents or grandparents were picking up a bottle of Chablis for dinner.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, yeah, consistency. And again, from your perspective as somebody who's in retail, right, you want to be able to present that wine to a consumer who's coming in with a level of confidence that, that wine is actually giving you something that's consistent and pleasurable. I wonder what it will take in a way to change that mindset about Petit Chablis, to sort of encourage people to understand that category a little bit better. And I don't just mean consumers, by the way. I mean trade as well. I mean, I'm mostly talking to trade, and I find the same sort of resistance, or sometimes I don't know if it's the issue is on the supply chain. I don't know if it's just, importers not bringing in as much Petit Chablis because it's easier for them to sell their Chablis. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We work with a lot of small importers. That's a thing that we've always done, and they tend to work with lots of small growers. And we do have the opportunity to buy lots of Petit Chablis, so we're very picky about what we choose, and we have no problem finding fantastic wines that everybody along the chain behind us believes in fully. And I think that the one thing that might help is the increased presence of Petit Chablis from really, really top producers in the market. Maybe most famously, Ravenau does Petit Chablis bottling now in Magnum, which you see on some very, very top wine lists.
Yeah.
And so when you see a producer like that going to the trouble of putting, Petit Chablis in a Magnum format, I think that will raise interest. Obviously there isn't enough of that wine to change the consumer environment. There's very, very little of it, in fact. But I think that knowing that is happening might shift things a little bit throughout the chain and encourage people to encourage importers to offer, an even broader selection.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And so actually you did mention, that you have the privilege of choosing from a lot of really, really small producers, and you have quite an array. So what are you looking for when you are looking to make that decision of what Petit Chablis you want to put on your shelf?
The first thing always is that the wine is really good, and we think that that it's tasty, that it's going to make people happy. Yeah. Before you get too complicated about it. With Petit Chablis, with all Bourgogne, I think that the beyond it being the kind of wine that will bring people pleasure, the single most important thing is a sense of typicité, that it be typical, that it give you a feel for the appellation. Mm-hmm. And so in the case of Petit Chablis, that means, when you're tasting Chablis, or especially, Premier Grand Cru Chablis, you're looking really for those particular Kimmeridgian markers and for a kind of complexity and at the upper ends, like a depth and a length on the palate. Mm-hmm. In Petit Chablis, you're not necessarily looking for the same kind of length. You're not going to get a Grand Cru length from a village level wine. And you're not going to get the same Kimmeridgian sort of limestone. But you absolutely should still get layers of flavor. There's the very bright acid note. There should be some fruit to maybe not sink your teeth into, but definitely to bring a degree of pleasure. And while the minerality is different and not the same degree of focus, there are lots of very good Petit Chablis wines that do bring minerality to the table. And when you get those different elements in balance at a price that is going to be reasonable for our customers, then you have a no-brainer.
Is there a price point that you're comfortable saying, this is a good value at this price point?
That's a very difficult question lately because prices have been so much in flux.
Yeah.
But I would definitely say that the expectation is that a producer's Petit Chablis will cost a little bit less than their Chablis, which will, of course, cost less than their Premier Cru and, Grand Crus if they have them. Mm-hmm. So, how much of a discount would we expect from a Chablis to a Petit Chablis? Not a huge discount, a few dollars a bottle, maybe, a little bit more if there are outliers where you'd expect it to be a little bit more. But as always, it depends on the details. Some producers go to such incredible lengths to make a Petit Chablis. Everything is done by hand, and the yields are kept very, very low, and you end up with a Petit Chablis that is, really a beautifully expressive wine, and that it's taken a lot of time and effort and investment from them to make. You can't expect them to, sell that at 30% less than their Chablis just because the appellation has the word petit in it.
I would love to start tasting some wine. Are we ready to do that?
Yeah.
So we've got these three wines, and we're going to start with the Alain Geoffroy. We are tasting the 2019 vintage. Are you familiar with the Alain Geoffroy?
No, this is the first time I've tasted their Petit Chablis.
So, as always, you sort of always get this brilliance of color in Petit Chablis, which it's so pretty. I tasted these wines. I like to sort of pre-taste the wines a little bit before we meet, before we have this discussion. So I actually opened them and tasted them last night. And I've been doing that in general for these sessions. And I have to say, I kind of like doing that because I really find I like to see how the wines are kind of changing a little bit with a little bit of oxygen. For the most part, I have to say, I think it benefits them. And I just get this real kind of freshness. I'm getting almost like the squeeze of Meyer lemon, just kind of really rising out of that glass. I'm getting some pretty savory herbs like sage. I'm getting some green apple, which, is sort of my typical Petit Chablis. I'm curious if you're kind of getting anything else here with me.
Yeah, the savoriness really distinguishes this wine.
Yeah, there was a lot of savory herbs that I was getting in this wine. And in fact, it's interesting because I'm looking at my notes from last night, and I had sage, and I had some fennel. I had almost like parsley. It really was just tasted a lot, and very, very savory herbs for me. But this acidity right now is just really present and mouth-watering.
That's great. This is an example of one of the things that can make Petit Chablis so great with food.
Yeah.
At that degree of acidity with those subtly complex flavors just make it an incredible pairing for, obviously if you wanted to, you could have this just as a pre-dinner drink while you're, snacking on cheese or nuts or potato chips or whatever. But even though these don't tend to be very expensive wines, a wine with that kind of degree of freshness is going to just bring any food, no matter how fancy and elevated, to life. It's really, it's solid.
I'm kind of thinking the other day I went to a new restaurant, to me anyway, and we had a lot of different ceviche, and I'm just thinking right now that's what I would love to have with this wine. We had a tuna ceviche, and then we had some crudo, some salmon crudo, and it was just with a little bit of yuzu, and and I could easily have this wine with that.
The yuzu, I can see the citrus, what you're identifying as Meyer lemon, rich citrus would pair incredibly well with yuzu, would complement it beautifully. But I love using wines like this in a contrasting way as well, especially when they have the sage or thyme sort of notes in them. You can imagine a dish that's more has more base notes, and a wine like this would just cut right through those and bring the whole thing to life.
And there's a hint of that saltiness that I get, but it's not overt here. But it's just sort of like just frames and gives the finish a little bit of grip in a nice way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. The finish is pretty lengthy, I would say, for a Petit Chablis. It's a pretty serious finish. And the acidity is great. And it also is an example, I think, of one of the things that distinguishes, to me, it's a little hard to put into words, but the Portlandian limestone compared to the Kimmeridgian seems to have a vibrancy, whereas the Portlandian seems to have a directness to me. And this is like a very direct acidity that just, it's like it's bracing and it cuts right through.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's lovely in its own way.
Let's taste the second wine.
Right.
So the second wine is, again, Petit Chablis from 2019, and it's from William Febvre. So definitely a more, a larger producer, more readily available, probably.
I'd love to know more specifically what the soils are here, because this one does on the nose. Do we have a note on that? I don't know. It does on the nose seem to have a little bit more minerality to me. I don't know if you're picking that up too, but.
Yeah. So what I have in terms of the soils, so wine number one was clay limestone. That's all I have. For this one, it says brown limestone with loamy and sandy in some places. The other thing that so both of these wines were fermented in stainless steel.
Just the fruit to me is a little bit round. As you said, the finish is maybe a tiny bit less grippy, a little bit more on the fruit than on the saline note.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, absolutely delicious.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm getting a little bit more sort of stone fruit notes here, whereas on the other one, it was kind of definitely in sort of the yellow green citrus. And there is kind of a almost like a light creaminess to the palate that I'm getting. And I don't mean this in that sort of buttery way. I just mean texturally. And a little bit of, I get a little bit of salinity on the finish, but there's definitely more. It's a very different expression. And I kind of love, I mean, I love differentiating wines. To me, if the whole point of having different wines is that they should offer something unique and different. And to me, the first one is such a kind of an expression of a more bracing, leaner, sort of more clear, linear. And this one is offering a little bit more. It's a little bit richer, it's a little bit rounder, but you still have this beautiful acid pop in the end, which again puts me very much in this Petit Chablis area.
Totally.
Any food thoughts on this one? Anything you'd want to, if somebody comes into the store and says, I am making blah, blah, blah tonight, that's going to make you go, this is the wine you want.
Well, so definitely if somebody came in and said that they wanted a bottle of wine to drink at the start of dinner or before dinner, I think this would be a beautiful choice, because that degree of roundness makes it really easy. It also, it's one of those wines that, is accessible in the best way. If you have people coming over for dinner who don't really know anything about wine, they're going to have no problem with this. They're not going to taste and be like, what's going on? Yeah. Why does this wine taste so salty and like sage? There isn't going to be any of that. And yet you're not really giving up anything in terms of complexity or elegance. It's all there. And in terms of classic pairings, I mean, I think, this is one where something like a risotto course at the start of a dinner, sort of as a preemie or something, would do really, really well with this. Just cutting through the creaminess of a simple risotto and bringing the whole thing, to life.
Yeah. All right, let's go to our last one. So our last wine is the Domaine de Maupertuis. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Maybe if not, we will fix that. And it's a Petit Chablis again. And this one is 2018. 2018 was really considered a really good year in the Chablis region. And I'm trying to see here. So in this case, it's interesting because we do have a little bit of some Kimmeridgian soil presence that's popping through. And very different on the nose. And let's see, in terms of, again, here there is malolactic fermentation, and the wine spent some time on the lees, and that's typical in a way. But you'll get some lees contact.
It has a leesy character to me, which is lovely. To me, on the palate, the Kimmeridgian note does translate. The acidity here is different. It does more of that, what I experience as a kind of vibration, and that plays very nicely with the slightly riper, slightly leesier character of the wine.
Yeah. If I had my eyes closed, if I was doing a blind tasting here, I'm not sure that I would think of a Petit Chablis when I taste this wine. I might
not if you tasted it beside two other Petit Chablis.
Yeah, it definitely has a different characteristic. There's a lot of depth here in this wine, a lot more than I would expect. And I think there's more sort of weight and texture. And I wouldn't surprise me if there's been a little bit of bétonnage. I don't think it's a lot of Lee's work like you might see in some other, but it does have that kind of roundness that you would get from a little bit more.
So and I feel like I pick it up a tiny bit on the nose too, whereas I did not all in the other two wines.
Yeah. And I think also, it does have that extra year, which has also kind of given it a little bit more time to evolve. I mean, again, I'm sort of getting a lot of these savory notes that I was getting on wine number one, but in a different, it's more like here I'm getting more bay leaf and tarragon.
If you look at it side by side with the first wine, it is also a little bit darker.
Yeah.
Which could be a function of a little bit of extra time in the bottle, because obviously wines get darker with age, but I'm not sure what happened so quickly. My guess is it's vintage and winemaking.
They all also, I mean, in terms of, certification, the first one is not certified organic in any way, but they're cultivating in a sustainable fashion. And then wines number 2 and 3 have HVA, which is a high environmental, I should stop looking to the side, higher inventive value. And this is kind of a new certification of practices. And so, and that's something else that we're seeing. I think a lot of wine regions are trying to move more and more in ecological, into more ecological practices.
It's important. It's hard. There are very serious issues. There are viruses that are decimating vineyards. Obviously, global warming is not a question of just an individual's practices, but it's the choices we all make together, and these things matter to the wine, and they matter to all of us. And it's great when you see producers take them seriously and do their best to make wise choices.
100%, yeah. Any inspired food pairings on this one?
Yeah, I mean, with the other ones, I was leaning more, aperitif, obviously, palate, thirst quenching, palate cleansing sort of experience. The first one has those, lovely sage, or to me, kind of thyme notes that make it, sort of an ideal pairing to something, light but complex. This one, with the extra body and the extra tension, I would be happy to have this, with any sort of a fish dish. But I can imagine having this with, a light veal dish. Even if you had pork with some of those herbs that you're picking up, you can imagine the way it would complement that. I think it could stand up to a cream sauce and really brighten the whole experience.
These wines are really lovely. And it's, what's interesting to me is, again, they sort of offer this range from this kind of very linear, more straightforward, but just, acidity, kind of aggression, the acidity expression, to William Febvre, which is, I would say, sort of the crowd pleaser. The one that, if you had friends over, everybody's going to enjoy this wine. I mean, I'm thinking, I have a lot of friends who are not wine people, and they would all love this wine. And this last one, which to me is a little bit more of kind of a food wine, and just has so much to offer. But at the end of the day, I think they all offer something that's really delicious and lovely and unique, and sort of makes a case for Petit Chablis for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're unique, and yet they're all of a piece, and it conveys, I think, the essential elements of Petit Chablis as a subset of Chablis and Bourgogne in general. It's a fun little tasting. Thank you for putting it together.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for joining me and joining our Straight Chablis chat. It's been lovely having you. And you'll see me at Blanc et Rouge or Flatiron soon, I'm sure, because well, probably Flatiron because it's more in my neighborhood. But
good.
Thank you
well,
so much.
We'll raise a glass in person together soon.
Cheers to that.